Hi, everyone, and welcome to webinar number 5. I'm Eric Snyder, and I'm the Executive Director of the University of Rochester Wilmot Cancer Institute's Technology and Innovation Group. Today, I'm joined by our Head of Architecture, Scott Isaacs. Scott is one of those people that has been all over the place, seen a lot in the technology space in general. He's the former director of the Cyber Collaboratory down in Louisiana and an SME for CompTIA, and has pretty vast knowledge in this space in general. So he's going to be talking about the cloud today. This is a presentation he did at HIMSS a couple years ago. And for anyone who's been to HIMSS or who has really any, or almost conferences are the same, you generally get 20, 30, 40 people in the audience. So this presentation, I think, had the most we've ever seen outside of a keynote. It was 100 plus easily, with some pretty incredible feedback as well. Lastly, before we get started here, November's webinar is going to be back to our technology releases with the expansive data dictionary application. And it'll be presented by lead developer Emily Strong. So we'll have more on that shortly, but without further ado, here's our Head of Architecture, Scott Isaacs.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the introduction. Like Eric said, my name is Scott Isaacs. I'm the Head of Architecture and Senior Innovator here at the Technology and Innovation Group. And I'm going to be giving an abbreviated version of my Demystifying the Cloud. You're just renting somebody else's servers talk from HIMSS. Today's agenda is going to be, we're going to start off with just a high-level overview of what cloud infrastructure is and the technology behind it. Then we'll get into some cloud utilization strategies. So to just go ahead and kick us off, what is the cloud? The cloud is an ever-evolving infrastructure of different data centers that are connected, software, microservices, and things of that nature. Every day, different cloud providers from Azure, AWS to Google come out with new different offerings or change their offerings. Just to kind of give you a basics of what the comparison of on-premise versus cloud different models are. In the beginning, there was 3. You had infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And as you can see from this chart, depending on what the offering is, depends on how much of it is managed by yourself or how much of it is managed by your cloud provider. And offloading those different items that are managed by the cloud provider is just less for you to have to do, but it's also less control that you have. Well, and since this was how the cloud pretty much started with these 3 services, it's actually expanded over the past decade or so to include things like STAS, PAS, DAS. So, and you can see here with this funnel, the lower it is, the more control you have, and the more you're responsible for, and the further up you go, the more it's all controlled by the cloud provider. And I'm sure you can see some things that you recognize on here, like Office 365 and G Suite. Those are your software as a service things. Then you have functions as a service, which are just microservices to where there's a little trigger that says, hey, we saw something, we need to do something about it. And then database as a service, which, we've all used databases. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things. And then, of course, storage as a service. I forgot to mention that one. That's your Dropbox and things of that nature. The thing with this expanded model is that all of these actually existed beforehand under the 3 models. They've just kind of subbed them out into a more niche products. And one of the problems with that, with current cloud infrastructure, is that over the years, a lot of this evolution has been nomenclature and marketing driven. And I say that as in they will rename services that already exist. So like a private cloud can be 2 different things. It can be an instance that you have privately in Azure or AWS, or it could be a cloud that you have on your on-premise, which that's basically just data center virtualization at that point, but now it's been nicknamed private cloud. And then you have managed private cloud. Edge is one of the newer ones that's come up. And then DAAS, which you have to worry about with DAAS, is it used to be database as a service, but now it can be desktop as a service as far as a virtual desktop environment. So, and now they are, just using new names for existing services, which if you don't have cloud experts on hand, it leads to a lot of confusion in organizations because if you're not keeping up daily with these new changes that are coming out, you can get left behind or use the wrong nomenclature and spin up the wrong items. So it's something you really have to keep up with. And like I mentioned before, just with SQL database instances, it used to be platform as a service, but now it's database as a service. So which you don't need to confuse with desktop. So having cloud expertise under the roof is extremely important in today's cloud postures for deployments. So, and then of course, edge computing is one of the newer ones. What used to be known as IoT, and is still known as IoT, Internet of Things, is now incorporated into edge computing. So it's because so your smart thermostat that used to be IoT is now considered edge because it has its own compute processor inside of it. So with a lot of the where edge used to be just be like an actual server or something that would process somewhere in between a sensor and a data center. So once again, trying to keep up with the terminology and all the changes that are within the cloud is something that's in and of itself is a full-time job. So let's go into utilization strategies. With the cloud, things are always evolving. So cloud providers are pretty much trying to figure out how to use their own services as they're deploying them to you, because there are a lot of instances where the back end changes, security changes. Like I said, you saw the nomenclature changes, or they will deprecate a service for another service. We recently had it to where the IoT buttons that one cloud provider had sold to the hospital had been deprecated, and they're trying to figure out how to replace it because they had a lot of micro functions tied into that for operations. And it was something that was, when you have hundreds of these buttons and sensors out there, and then a cloud provider deprecates them and you're reliant on them, you've got to be able to shift very quickly to get at a replacement or compensate for that. So one and very important thing is never use preview of any production workloads. I've seen a preview for a particular product go on for 6 years and then be dropped by the cloud provider. It also means it's not stable. So there's also a lot of problems with it. And it also means it's going to be changing frequently. So the way you're using it now might not be the same way they'll be using it in 2 months. So preview in an enterprise sort of solution, you never want to use anything like that, even though it looks like it might fit your needs. So, and one thing that gets a lot of people caught up in trouble in dealing with cloud is that the terminology is the same for a lot of on-premise assets, but they do not function the same. So you really need to have experts that work in cloud as opposed to your on-premise, because you'll have a lot of organizations say, well, we have an IT person that deals with our on-premise data center. This all looks the same. They can do both. And that's not the case. Having that specialized expertise and somebody that can look at the cloud and know how it functions and works, because VNet in a data center versus a VNet in the cloud, even though they're labeled the same and the principles the same, they're actually set up differently. And in many cloud initiatives that I've seen have failed due to not investing properly in the internal talent, because that internal talent is imperative to understanding the cloud, keeping you out of trouble for, like I said, different production workloads and the way they change, and also budget overruns. I've seen some massive budget overruns because something wasn't scaled properly, to the tunes of tens of thousands of dollars being lost because a asset was accidentally set as a static asset where it was fully deployed all the time instead of being a burst asset where it shut down automatically afterwards. So not only can you not have your cloud deployment malfunction, you can also run up large costs if you're not careful. So when it comes to your governance strategies, while stakeholders are important, they don't really understand how all of this works as far as the cloud is concerned. And by stakeholders, I don't mean just your standard IT department and the hierarchy of it. I also mean as far as your different departments and things of that nature that are going to be utilizing the cloud assets. So, like I said, while they should have a idea of what's going on and have input, your final strategy should lie with your subject matter experts, because how fast and how flexible the cloud is, you can't really go to committee every single time. And because committees is where innovation goes to die pretty much, because you'll just get stuck in a loop of let's revisit this, let's revisit that. You want to try to make everybody happy, and in that sense, nobody's happy, and then you'll never move forward. So you wind up getting stuck with the sticky middle where everybody wants to compromise on it, and then you wind up without a product. And the cloud changes too quickly for that, and that's actually not the purpose of the cloud. Is to actually move fast and get things done. So and you really do want to make sure that you take care of do a cost benefit analysis on your different workloads, because if you people have been finding and retracting from the cloud some because they found the expense was more than they thought it was going to be compared to on-premise assets. If you're doing something, very specific workloads that are burst because you need to have access to some high compute power, but only for a short duration, that might be a good use for a cloud. But if you have some equipment that is going to be utilized significantly for a month or two or a year, it actually might be better for you to purchase the equipment and then have it on premise, because you'll see significant savings and have more control over it, especially in highly secure environments like a hospital. So, and like I said, burst computing, especially workloads, does make sense. Or if you have some archive storage, it can be cheaper than enterprise solutions that you have on premise, but you need to check that against how much it would cost to internally purchase it, especially with doing GPUs and AI. GPUs and AI in the cloud are fairly expensive. If you're going to be utilizing them frequently, checking on your own workloads and your own data center purchases is very important. So, just to recap, you need to make sure that you have a dedicated team that stays up to date on your cloud infrastructure and the different changes to it at all times, and the different offerings that are coming out, because some might be better for your workload than what you're doing currently. So, many cloud assets do have the same naming conventions as your on-premise assets, but that doesn't mean they work the same. And that doesn't mean that the people that take care of your on-premise assets would automatically be able to take care of your cloud ones. So, and you need to honestly assess your internal cloud expertise and staff accordingly, to make sure that you have the correct people in place and enough of them to do the work, because you don't want to fall into we can do that trap, because there's a lot of well-meaning people in enterprise where they can say, yes, we can do that. And just because you have a capability to do something doesn't mean you have the ability or the bandwidth to do it, because people have their own full-time jobs. And if they're trying to take over part of the cloud, they might not have that actual bandwidth to do what they need to do. So, and then once again, make sure you review your burst computing versus purchasing services internally for specialty workloads, because you can get into a situation where you're spending a lot more on cloud services than you are just actually purchasing the server internally, and then you would have more availability of it as well. And finally, do you need to use the cloud, or are you just wanting to? That's one thing I've run into a lot of times, to where people assign the fact that the cloud is something more advanced, or they think they ought to use it for a particular grant or something of that nature, when actually using the data center makes a lot more sense. They're just tied up in the notion of wanting to use the cloud, or what would be considered quote unquote more advanced services. And at that's the short and sweet version of my HIMSS talk. And at this time, we will open it up for any questions. And on the screen, I should say, that's a link to our website, a QR code to our website, and also my email address. If you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. I think in our healthcare space, especially, this is such an important topic. So we do have one question. Unless there's more, we'll stick with one. And it was, do you see the cloud becoming more or less utilized in healthcare as we go on?
Currently, I'm seeing a pullback of cloud usage. Overall, I should say, there is a push for some cloud uses for specialty, like we're talking about earlier with AI, or with some of the software as a service offerings like ChatGPT for enterprise. Those are obviously in the cloud, or for some archiving storage. But as far as general use, like there has been, there's actually a pullback because it's a little more difficult to maintain when you have your data center and everything else on premise. And also the fact that the main thing is that they're not seeing the cost benefit that was, sold as to them as being. So they're noticing for these servers that are going to be up 24/7, it's actually a lot cheaper for them to go ahead and purchase it and keep them on premise.
Makes sense. So I think that's the only question. So we'll end there. Thanks everyone for joining. Like I had mentioned, in November we'll be doing data dictionary with Emily Strong. Until then, I hope everyone has a great week. Thank you.
Thank you all.